Hello, I'm Jonathan Weiner, and welcome to Are You Listening? Today I'm going to talk to you about automation in mastering. It's a question I often get about, do we use it? What are the applications for it? Before I dive in, go to the iZotope.com website, click on the Learn tab, and learn things. You'll find videos, blogs, Pro Audio Essentials, which is our ear training tool that's online, and many other opportunities to learn about doing your music production better. And please subscribe to this video series so you'll be notified when the next episode is released. So when it comes to automation and mastering, it's not something that's used every day. We always go into a mastering session assuming that the mix engineer has done everything that they possibly can to get a mix to work from beginning to end, and that a global treatment across the entire track, it's kind of the icing on the cake that's going to bring out the color, make sure the level is correct, do all of the things that we might want to do in mastering, but there's not a lot of changing going from one moment to the next. Quite frankly, if we do make big changes when we're automating in mastering, it can distract the listener, and it can actually change the production and the musical values. If I find myself wanting to automate in mastering, the most common thing that I do is a simple gain ride, a level change. There might be an introduction that's a little bit quiet going into the first verse, for instance, or a little level tweak going from a verse to a chorus. Sometimes this is just a little bit of finesse that we can bring to the treatment of a track to make it even a little bit more effective. And that's not to say that there was anything wrong with the mix. As a mastering engineer, I have a great deal of respect for the fact that the mix engineer is dealing with tens or sometimes tens of tracks in their mix. It's a lot to keep track of, no pun intended. Another context where this might come up is when you're sequencing an entire album. If you're going from a song that ends with a full-on chorus to a very sensitive introduction, then we might want to massage the transition, the relative levels, going from the loud ending to the quiet beginning, but somehow return the next track back to its original level so that we don't end up with this a creeping master. There's a term that we use sometimes in mix called a creeping mix, which means you start at one level and then you push one thing up and it's too loud compared to something else, and you push the next thing up, and by the time you're done, at the end of the song, your mix has increased in level by 10 dB and become unworkable and unlistenable. The same thing can happen with a master of 10 songs, where the first song can start quiet, and if we start adding level with each incremental track, then by the time you get to the 10th track, you've got a lot more level on the record than you do in the first. So if we have to manage that change by automating an introduction, usually we'll look for an opportunity to gradually return the level back to what the original mix level was and keep some consistency overall across an entire record. So here's an example of a simple level change. Level changing is probably the highest fidelity kind of signal processing that we can do. There's almost no penalty. There's no trade-off. So I'm going to play going from one section to another, and right where we get into the chorus, where the hook lives, it feels to me like the track could use just a tiny bit more level. So listen to this. I gotta run, but I swear I won't hide. Look for me, I'll be on the block with polka dot. Some of the change in feeling might be addressed with a little bit of EQ or a little bit of compression, but if I want a little bit of push just when we get to the chorus there, I'm just going to take the level up like a half a dB and listen to what happens. I gotta run, but I swear I won't hide. Look for me, I'll be on the block with polka dot. So I like that a little better. It feels a little more energetic. It also keeps the vocal level a little bit more consistent when the rest of the band comes in. Before, it felt like the vocal dropped a tiny bit in a way that felt like it, as the listener, I was having to lean in to sort of feel like I still had the same amount of contact with the vocal. It's also not that uncommon to have to adjust the intro level of a track when we're thinking about it in the context of a 10-song record, for instance, and we go from a loud ending to a very quiet beginning. We want to make sure to manage the journey across a whole collection of songs in an album. So we might raise the intro a little bit and then find strategically a place where we can bring the level back so that the next song doesn't then have that increase in level all the way through, because that could result in a gain staging problem across an entire collection of tunes. So that's the simplest example of automation and mastering. Now I'm going to move on to another example that gets a little bit more musical, a little bit more complicated. So here's a track that I think could use a little bit more help, for lack of a better word. Respect the mix. It's complicated to mix. In fact, I think mixing is harder than mastering, says the mastering engineer. So I'm going to play maybe about a minute of this song. And here are the things I want you to listen for. There's a transition when we go from the introduction with the vocal to a interstitial section where the bass takes the lead. The relationship between the level of the voice and the presence of the voice and the level of the bass doesn't feel quite matched to me. It feels to me that the bass is a little bit more prominent, which doesn't quite feel right to me. Then when we go from that section into the first verse, it feels like a pretty good match, although I feel like the voice, again, needs to come forward compared to the bass in the interstitial section. But then when we go to the chorus, it feels like the bass takes a step back and we lose the body and the support from it. And the voice doesn't feel like it's quite sitting in the mix quite right. So there are a few things to pay attention to. I'm going to try to address each one of those issues with a couple of automation snapshots. But listen to the track first.
Sing gently to mine, and the waves beneath us crashed, breaking on the towering stones, splitting rays of sun on the shore. The breeze was spilling memories. We laughed, salt sticking to our clothes. The water felt so sweet with the sand between our toes, erasing everything we used to know.
Sounds pretty good, but I think I can make it sound a little bit better by making some subtle adjustments in between these sections. So I've designed a few presets. Most of them really only adjust the EQ to deal with some of the subtleties in the balance between the very deep bass and the mid bass and their relationship to the voice. But then I add a little bit more compression in the automation snapshot going into the chorus. I want to point out that what I'm starting with is a global treatment that works across the entire track. I'm not trying to reinvent the tonality. I'm not trying to add a ton more compression in one section compared to another. Rarely will that actually work in mastering. Usually those kinds of transitions and those kinds of contrasts are best achieved in mixing. So I'll go for an overall shape. You can see it on the screen with the EQ. I've tucked away a little bit of the very deepest part of the low end, like below 60 hertz, sort of 50 hertz, and to thin out the kick drum. Added a little bit of mid bass to bring out the bass note a tiny bit, and then tucked back a little bit in the low mid range to get a little bit of clarity to separate the bass from the body of the voice. So I'm going to go ahead and record these snapshots. I've saved them all in series. I've got my intro, my first verse, and my chorus, and I've even got one for the outro, and I'll come back and talk about that in a moment.
We laughed, salt sticking to our clothes. The water felt so sweet with the sand between our toes, erasing everything we used to know. Memories walk, memories true, memories false, memories washed away. It's okay to let them hold.
So you could hear when I was recording the automation, there was a little audible interruption in the audio. That was just while the record of the preset switch was taking place. But now, if I play back the audio, we should be artifact free.
Memories talk, memories walk, memories true, memories false, memories washed away.
So there you could see the transition happened. Again, you're not really hearing any noticeable change in the audio. That's by design. In theory, it should just sound like it did before, only better, right? So that's the point that we're after here. So I think there's also an opportunity to do something a little bit different to the end of the track. By the time we get to the last chorus, we've heard the hook. We know what the vocal line is. The prominence of the vocal isn't quite as important as it was the first time that we heard it. But there are new instruments that have been added, and there's an opportunity to kind of have it be the emotional apex of the track. So what I ended up doing for the outro, for the fade out, is adding a very, very subtle amount of stereo width just in the upper mid-range so that we could bring out the ostinato guitars and some of the sort of surrounding, enveloping information, just so it feels a little bit more like the clouds are parting and the sun is shining as we get to that last moment in the track. So see if you hear the difference here.
Memories talk, memories walk, memories true, memories false, memories washed away. It's okay to let them hold you down. Memories know, memories show all of the scratches on you.
So if we compare the snapshot that's designed for the chorus with the snapshot that's designed for the outro, you'll hear that difference.
Memories washed away. It's okay to let them hold you down. Memories know, memories show all of the scratches on you. So it's the debris that weighs you down.
So it's a subtle difference. It's kind of a nice extra little bit of icing on the cake. So this is an example of how automation can be helpful and can help more fully realize what I think is already built into the mix and built into the arrangement. And I'm just trying to take it across the finish line, just add that little bit extra. If you're going to apply any processing that will change dynamically going between sections in a song, I really recommend that you render out the audio first and check it before you commit to the master, for a couple of reasons. Obviously, listening back to make sure that you're happy with what you did is important. But if you are rendering audio in real time, there's always the possibility for something to go wrong and for there to be a flaw, some kind of dropout. Maybe the presets don't switch or the processing doesn't switch the way you want it to switch. You want to make sure you know that before you commit to something as a master and send it out into the world. And this is kind of the way we used to do it anyway. We used to print songs in sections and then edit them together when we captured the song with the printing. And it's not a bad idea, especially with archival in mind. If you're going to archive a session and maybe want to go back and look at the master that you did or reuse it 10 years later, you don't know what operating systems or DAWs are going to look like then, or software versions. So it's always a good idea to render out the audio with all the signal processing in it. So that gives you some things to think about. If there's something about an arrangement that's not quite working, maybe it's just a little level adjustment that needs to happen that will make it feel like it comes to life a little bit more. As I said, most of the time, a single global treatment across a good mix, across a track, that's going to get it for you. So thanks for watching. Please stay tuned for more episodes of Are You Listening? Thanks.